Hi everyone. Today's presentation focuses on how technological determinism appears in our world through the rapid rise of artificial intelligence. Technological determinism is the idea that technology doesn't just influence society, but actually can drive it, shaping our jobs, our institutions, and even our identities. Across the research we viewed, AI shows up not just as a neutral tool, but as something that can shift power and decision making in fields like social work, home healthcare, and K-12 education. K through 12 education. AI systems can often override and undermine human expertise, even when the technology itself is unreliable. At the same time, AI driven platforms may be influencing how people learn, how decisions are made, and how individuals understand themselves. Altogether, these patterns point out the central question behind technological determinism. Are we shaping AI, or is AI beginning to shape us?
I analyzed the article AI Failure Loops and Devalued Work. This article argues that in often undervalued feminized professions like social work, home healthcare, and K 12 education, AI systems create failure loops where overconfidence in AI and underconfidence in human expertise reinforce each other. As a result, already devalued workers are losing authority and existing inequalities are being deepened. There is potential researcher bias in the study as it was only conducted by a few small number of researchers who could have had preconceived biases. The methodology of this study was an academic review of academic and gray literature on AI being deployed in 3 feminized occupations. Analysis was aided by researcher expertise through 10 years of work observing worker practices, designing interventions, and speaking with leadership and managers. AI had different implications in each of the 3 fields. In social work, AI risk assessments are being used to screen for child mistreatment. This allows them to predict outcomes over a 2-year period of time, but this does go against direct social worker training, which requires workers to make assessments based on immediate risk and not long-term potentials. In home health care, AI care robots are being heavily invested in and is decreasing the demand for AI for home health workers, and workers have to spend extra time to do labor to maintain these robots and operate them currently. In K through 12 education, the main goal with AI is that every student will be able to work at their own pace and get personalized support, but these technologies are often made without thinking about teacher needs or constraints within the classroom. A current example of AI versus human expertise is throughout the later months of 2025, nurses in New York have been pushing back against the attempt to roll out AI into their hospitals. They claim that hospitals are implementing unsafe, underdeveloped, and untrustworthy AI and to hopefully increase profit. And nurses are arguing that focus needs to be on support for nurses and better patient care instead. Societal understandings and perceptions of AI are definitely changed throughout this article, and it helps to shape the understanding of AI by showing how we tend to view AI systems as more reliable, authoritative, and objective than human workers. And this article also helps to give a more realistic perception of AI by demonstrating how it can deepen inequalities and have a lot of other negative effects. AI also is very related to tech determinism throughout this article, as in social work, social workers cannot simply refuse this technology, and workers were told they were expected not to disagree with the AI too often. So a lot of times they don't listen to their best judgment and they just agree with the AI because of a fear of being fired. In home health care, they also are unable to decline using this technology, and these care robots are intended to basically replace human workers. And in K through 12 education, AI development is going towards the goal of automating away from human teachers, and it has reduced teachers to mere service providers for this technology. There's been a clear shift towards viewing AI as the primary force of driving workplace advancement, and this reinforces a tech deterministic belief that technology, not people, is what's shaping the future of all 3 of these jobs. So now let's go on to look at another article.
I looked at an article over kind of how large language models were first adopted and how they became as ubiquitous as they are today. So my article looked at 305 million artifacts. A, a super majority of them are going to be job postings from LinkedIn because they just scraped that entire database and looked at every single job posting. They did have about 750,000 consumer complaints, 500,000 corporate press releases from 3 or 4 different aggregators of that sort of thing, and then about 15,000 press releases to the UN by various countries. And so they analyzed each of these they were looking for patterns of word usage that would indicate AI generated content or AI assisted content, is how they described it, where it was either entirely composed by a large language model or primarily composed by a large language model with minor editing afterwards. And so I've got some fun graphs to look at. So here I've got 4 different graphs broken up by those categories you saw, and they've got the date that ChatGPT was launched, and across all of them you see a pretty big spike around 2023, and then it kind of sort of levels off as we have achieved our first initial we have our initial early adopters, and then it kind of levels off, but still is gradually increasing. But even that first initial spike is reaching 15 to 20% in a majority of these categories. Starting in the top left, that's our consumer complaints, hit 15%. Our press releases from corporations hit 20% in one of our categories. Our UN press releases by countries is sitting closer to 10, and the job posting varies a decent amount depending on what field it's in, but it's sitting around 10% as well. And another interesting way they broke down this data was by region. So they're specifically looking at those consumer complaints, because that's when it's just an average person who's analyzing this data, who is using the large language model and is causing this data to be created. And what I found more interesting is going to be these 3 graphs over here. And that top one has the variation between urbanized versus non-urbanized areas, where we see urban areas are hitting about 18% while usage, while the non-urban areas is hitting about only 10. And then the middle graph there, C, looks at areas that have where their average level of education is above or below college graduate level. And while that range is much closer, it's only about a 3-4% difference, there is still a noticeable difference where areas that have lower education than a college graduate does see a slightly higher increase in usage. And that is the case even in that bottom graph, where they're looking at specifically highly urbanized areas and then comparing the education level of the people. So kind of how do we interpret this? How are we going to tie this into technological determinism? First, I just want to throw out there that 10% of countries who are writing press releases to the UN are using some amount of ChatGPT is concerning and raises a lot of trust and transparency questions. I also think it's worth noting that these are lower bound estimates, that they erred to the side of, if we can't tell if it's ChatGPT or a large language model or not, we're going to assume it's not. But if we go back to that first set of graphs, and there were even more graphs breaking it down further, across all of them, we see this very similar adoption trend where 2023-ish, there's that initial spike, and then it's continuing to grow, but at a significantly slower pace. And that kind of similarity is suggestive of this kind of technological determinism, where even across all of these different fields, because we have this technology, people are being pushed to use it. Kind of even if you Um, like your people are being encouraged to use it kind of regardless of their personal stance, where we see the 20% of companies are using some form of LLM to write their press releases. It's suggestive that there are forces that are pushing people to do this. And if we look at specifically just a subsection of more recently developed companies, that number is even higher. Where if you look at companies founded after 2019, the amount of press releases they put out that have large language model usage in them is even higher. So that kind of uniformity is suggesting there is there's a force that's pushing people towards using these, and that it is likely technological determinism. Um, and I do want to note that it's not necessarily a bad thing that this push is happening. Looking at kind of the socioeconomic impacts just a tad bit and generalizing a whole lot. Something that the article points out is because we're seeing those bottom two graphs here, where areas that have lower education are using it more, we can see that as sometimes a good thing, where we can say, okay, even these people that don't have these degrees, that can't write, haven't been formally taught how to write these super well put together arguments, can still use these platforms, these large language models, to advocate for themselves. And that's what they're doing here with because these were collected from consumer complaints. We see these people using large language models and using them to advocate for themselves and write press releases and do this and that and the other. We're seeing that what we're really seeing there is all of these different forms of communication are coming from the same source, this single or however many large language models people are using. And so it's kind of creating this uniformity of not only we should use GPT in more places, but also it's creating this uniformity of language where all language is kind of coming from this singular source. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our next presenter.
Lastly, let us explore how education is transformed by AI. This is a development that is impacting our education, with the University of Kentucky becoming an AI university. In addition, there are countless other institutions of higher education that incorporate AI to advance institutional goals. Thus, there are many studies regarding the impact of AI on higher education. In light of this, I found a research article from the University of South Africa published in 2024 that discusses the ramifications of AI integration in education. However, this article primarily examines the impact of AI on primary education, acknowledging the current knowledge gap of AI on primary education. Furthermore, the focus is on exploring AI's potential role in data-driven decision-making. For the methodology, a systematic literature review of other research pertaining to AI and primary education is conducted, encompassing studies found in multiple databases and published from 2015 to 2024. In the results section, there are multiple positives from integrating AI into DDDM. It can create a personalized learning environment, identify weaknesses and strengths in the student skills, and help teachers plan lessons and optimize the curriculum, and offer early intervention for at-risk students more promptly. On the other hand, there are ethical concerns regarding data privacy and algorithmic bias that can profile students racially and socioeconomically. Lastly, AI shaping and enhancing education really fits into the framework and definition of tech determinism, illustrating how technology is reshaping society. However, is AI fully in the driver's seat, and would it replace the human teachers? This study suggests that human teachers are still the primary educators, but are relying on output of AI DDDM models. The current flaws of these models furthermore reinforce the importance of human educators, who should be AI literate to spot and rectify cases of algorithmic bias, for example.
We were able to find some good information about AI and tech determinism in these previous articles, but a research gap that we've identified is that there's very little on how AI algorithms are shaping people's identities. And our topic is about how platforms use AI algorithms that predict people's personality traits, interests, and communities. And this happens on apps like TikTok, Instagram Reels, and other social media and short form video platforms. And these systems push these identity related contents towards users, and it's shown through things like different aesthetics or communities such as gym talk or book talk. And they categorize people so specifically, but we don't know how much this actually affects them or that people feel this affects them. So the purpose of our study would be to examine whether people feel that AI recommendation algorithms influence their identity, interests, or the communities they feel like they belong in. And our research question would be, do AI algorithms influence how people perceive their own identity or interests? Our hypothesis would be that higher usage of these AI-driven algorithm platforms will be associated with greater reports of identity shifts or stronger identification with recommended communities. For the methods, the participants would aim to be around 100 adults aged 18 to 30, and we would do a Google Forms or Qualtrics anonymous survey, and they must be using at least one platform with these AI algorithms, and we'll be recruiting people through online things like social media. The survey will contain demographic information and then the platform use frequency. So we'll have a list of the platforms, and then we'll also be asking Likert scale questions with 1 being strongly disagree and 5 being strongly agree. And these questions will be measuring the influence of the algorithms and on their identity. So an example question would be I have discovered online communities through or interest groups through these platforms, or the content the algorithm has suggested me has influenced me to change my identity in this way or change the community that I feel I'm associated with. To do the analysis, we'll be doing a simple Pearson correlation, the independent variable being time spent on the AI-driven platforms, and the dependent variable will be a score of their Likert scale questions kind of added up, and that way it'll be continuous data, which is why a Pearson correlation would be appropriate. And then so this study is linked to tech determinism in AI because if participants say that the recommendation algorithms influence how they describe themselves or what communities they feel like they're part of, that means that technology is playing an active role in shaping culture and personal identity instead of people independently forming these interests or communities, and that AI systems may be nudging them towards certain labels, aesthetics, or traits. And then that's exactly what tech determinism suggests, which that behavior isn't just a tool we use, but a force that kind of steers human behavior and culture and social patterns.
To wrap up, the research that we looked at shows that AI's impact reaches far beyond our convenience or efficiency. In many professions, it's already reshaping authority, decision-making, and the value we place on human workers. In education, it's changing how students learn and how teachers teach. In everyday life, algorithms may be influencing the identities and communities people feel connected to. All of this brings us back to technological determinism. These examples demonstrate that as AI systems become more embedded in society, they increasingly guide how we think, behave, and understand ourselves. The future isn't predetermined, but it is being shaped by the technologies we create and the choices we make about how to use them. Ultimately, recognizing this influence is the first step in making sure AI serves people rather than the other way around.